So earlier last month, I did a summary of the Shadow and Bone books because I absolutely adored the series. And besides this series and the Chronicles of Narnia, it truly has to be one of my favorite fantasy series of all time, especially within young adult fantasy. And yet, while finishing the book, I couldn't help but feel something. As much as I love the Grisha-verse and talking about everything else in it, I can't help but feel unsatisfied for how this book left Alina, especially when it comes to her love interests. But first, let me explain. There's two angles I'm going to take with this: the show's creative direction and the original books. Also, this means there's going to be a lot of spoiler alerts for everyone who hasn't read the books just yet. But basically, in the end of the final book, when it comes to the Grisha-verse, Alina ends up with Mal, but she sort of had a love triangle with Mal and Nikolai, the prince. Now, I always thought this love triangle was quite interesting. I kept on thinking about it logically. Who would have been better for Alina to end up with, Mal or Nikolai? Or maybe none of them. Both of them have pros and cons. And I know you might ask, Deborah, what about the Darkling? I refuse to put the Darkling as a love triangle in here, but I will explain that later. And don't get me wrong, I don't necessarily hate Mal or hate Nikolai. I just have different opinions, and I do think that each relationship with Alina has their own faults. But before we get into that, if you guys don't know who I am, hi, my name is Deborah, student singer, songwriter, and everything else in between. Welcome back to my channel, and today we'll be talking about Shadow and Bone. Let's get into it. So first of all, let's start off with Mal, because he is the most prominent one in this book. In my personal opinion, I think the relationship between Mal and Alina is that of codependency and not love. But let me land and try and explain why. Before I talk about codependency, let's understand what codependency is. Codependency is a dysfunctional relationship dynamic where one person assumes the role of the giver, sacrificing their own needs and their well-being for the sake of another, the taker. The bond in question doesn't always have to be romantic. It can occur just as easily between parent, child, friends, and family members. A lot of the times, the codependent person places an excessive reliance on the enabler for emotional support, validation, or even day-to-day decision making. They feel a deep need for the enabler's approval and validation to the detriment of their own already low sense of self. Now, I personally do think you do see this sort of characteristic happen between the both of them, actually, and it's especially prevalent with Alina. Now, I want to just point out some instances and some things I have noticed. This is, of course, not me trying to diagnose her because I'm not a psychologist, but I do want to point out some things that were very glaring to me about their relationship, but also about Alina's past and her sense of self and what she feels about herself, so we can get a deeper understanding. So in the beginning of the first book, Alina is completely enamored with Mal. In fact, we get a clue into her history being an orphan and the fact that she's always had a crush on Mal since, well, you know, he became very attractive to her. But the thing is, of course, he never really saw her, which I mean to say is somewhat fairly normal, but they've been together as friends since the beginning, and she's never known anybody else on quite that deep of a level. Unlike Mal, in which it is noted in the books that he is able to make other friends and he has other friendships with other people, albeit it is not that deep, but at least he's able to socialize with more people. I don't know if anyone has noticed, but even in season 1 and the books, Alina has not had any proper friendships until she meets Genya, when she becomes the Sun Summoner and she is practically indoctrinated in the Little Palace. Before that, and between her orphanage time, she doesn't really mention any notable friendships with anybody else. And if you think about it on a deeper level, because of the fact that Alina has never had the opportunity, nor has had the ability to make other friends besides Mal, sometimes I do feel that their relationship was quite codependent. And I can't help but wonder if that crush also stemmed from that or is very interlinked with that, because you see that more and more as their relationship develops. There's this sort of hanging on to Mal, not only of the destiny thing that's between them, but also because she has literally nobody else. They only had each other. I will also note that this is where the show does do a better job of giving Alina more of a personality that we can hang on to, instead of in the books where she doesn't really have much going on. In the series, it's shown that she can at least fight for him in the orphanage and they only really had each other in the orphanage, and they were bullied by others because they looked different and they had a different descent. However, at the same time, because the books are truly canon, I'm fully going off of that. So I will focus on that because I have something to work with towards the end rather than the show that is not completely finished. However, do not think for a second that I'm not aware of that. I am very much aware, and I do like the fact that the show did that better, but I have to use the original material as well. Now, I'm going to say they were both orphans in the city of Karamzin, and that city is not a kind place to children at all. And also, because of this destiny bond, they've been friends since they were little kids. But outside of that, if the both of them did not have this destiny bond constantly pushing them together and forward, do you think they would have really ended up together? I don't know. I think having other friends would have helped her with her self-confidence, and perhaps she would have understood what real friendship was like before she entered the little palace and was literally thrown in the middle of so many people. I also think having other friends would have helped her establish a bigger sense of self, and probably would have helped her self-esteem and confidence. Now, I'm pretty sure she's probably tried to make other friends. We don't get any assumption of that, but I'm gonna try and assume because otherwise that'd be pretty sad. But at the same time, especially in the books, when Alina interacts with other women before meeting Genya and before going to the little palace, the only other woman that we see her fully interact with is Zoya, and Zoya is an absolute asshole to her, so we can't even count that interaction. But also notice within the books, she doesn't really interact with any other woman. I know that she will eventually become friends with Genya, Tolia, and have a understanding with Zoya eventually. But outside of those interactions, a lot of the times the interactions she has with other women or other ladies are really focused on Mal and how they view Mal rather than her. Her inner monologue really continues that way, and I think that's quite sad. Of course, I'm not going to blame her. This is not really her fault, but it does make me wonder a lot. I will give another example. In the book Ruin and Rising, while Alina was underground and she was only allowed to come out for a certain amount of time, and she would see Mal on the training grounds with other people training other Grisha, she recognized one of the girls. I think her name was Rosie, from some time in her past, and that they had never really been close or never really been friends, and that she was beautiful, and that she was noticing how smiley and pretty she was close to Mal. And that's what I mean in the sense of you have a lot of those scenarios where she sees women in their relation to Mal, and it's a little sad. I might be reading too much into it, but it does strike me that at a certain point she does feel very insecure not being able to become friends with other women because she constantly compares herself to them. I mean, even with Genya, we know Genya is quite vain, that's part of her character, but a lot of the times Alina feels so self-conscious around Genya and other girls constantly. I don't completely blame her because of where she has grown up and how she feels about herself, and the fact that she has had no other support system to help her build her personality. So I can't completely blame her. And I also understand that if you have somebody that is like family in a situation where you've never had family, you'll want to cling on to them for dear life. So I don't completely judge her for it, but I do notice that as a trait. A lot of the times as well, Alina does not have her sense of self. She doesn't necessarily know what she wants or what she fully likes without Mal being in the picture. Outside of him, she knows that she's a map maker, she has a crush on Mal, and well, she hoped to get over the fold before her life changed and she became a sun summoner. In my personal opinion, being the sun summoner actually kind of helped her, but we'll get into that a little bit later. One of my personal biggest beefs with Mal was towards the end of the first book, where he mentioned that he didn't see her before, but he saw her now, and he was confessing his feelings to Alina. Mind you, these feelings came about after the fact that it was rumored that she was with the Darkling, and he felt very much jealous that she was around the Darkling, not knowing the kind of power dynamics that the Darkling was wielding against her, which I'll get into the other half of this video. But that's a big thing that never sat right with me, that the fact that it has to take jealousy of another person for you to recognize that you have feelings for somebody else. I don't know, that's a little bit weird to me, but let's move on. My other biggest problem with Mal is that when Alina's personality starts to change after she becomes a sun summoner in the second book and also in the second season, she becomes, well, technically more sure of herself. Well, at least she tries to be. She wields her power more, and her power becomes more attached to her. And because Alina has never had power, this is new to her. She's trying to grapple with it. But Mal, a lot of the times, cannot handle that. I think personally, and this is my personal breakdown of it, he has always been the popular one between the both of them. He had always been the one in front and center, and she was always in the background. He was popular with the women and with the ladies, but now that she was being deemed a saint, and that's practically close to royalty, he didn't really know how to feel or how to place himself in that world, which became a huge point of contention in their relationship. And I could not stand it, especially in the second book. They spent the majority of the book fighting. I will note, Mal is also not a great communicator of his feelings, and a lot of the times he doesn't really understand the feelings that he has. And again, I do give them the grace because of their situation that they grew up in and also their ages. But at the same time, he does have these little tantrums occasionally when Alina is not able to give him as much attention or cannot be as easily available as she once was. So to bring that all back into a concise argument, I do think these instances show the various degrees of codependency. The fact that she also has to rely on him for emotional support, but also a lot of the time, Alina's self-esteem would falter a lot depending on how Mal treated her. Sometimes she would even wonder why Mal was interested in her or why he saw her, or she didn't really understand why, because her self-esteem was so low, as if she was not a person who was deserving of love, romance, and somebody who's truly there for her and only her. A lot of the times when they would fight or they would argue, instead of having a healthy sense of self and recognizing that this is just an argument, it would impact her so much, and she would never have inner peace because of the situation. It sort of felt like they were on a seesaw of constant emotions a lot of the times, and I don't feel like this gets really well addressed in the book. Everything just kind of gets really hurried. Now, I know this is a fantasy series and not necessarily one based on psychotherapy, but it is quite concerning, and that is what I mean to say they have so many traits of codependency. I personally think that he was good for her in a certain stage of her life. I personally think Mal should have been, her first love, but at the same time, I think at a certain point she would have had to let him go for her own personal growth. A lot of the times it did feel like he was, not necessarily holding her back, but they would fall into moments where she would go through unnecessary stress because she was always wondering how Mal was feeling or how Mal was doing with this news, or whether Mal would be threatened with Nikolai being around her, etc., etc. And at some point, it just became really contentious and annoying. And that, to me, in a sense, was technically holding her back. Now, of course, I will note that it's naturally hurtful to have to hear that somebody you grew up with your whole entire life is now going to be in a different position from you. And now you want to be in a relationship with them, but you can't because of social standing. It's bound to get to you in some shape or form. But the way that he went about it was not healthy in the slightest. Sometimes it just really came off as sulky and immature and annoying. There were certain times where it felt like they were on the brink of a breakup, but towards the end of the book, they didn't really address all the fighting and all the weirdness that happened. They just sort of got together because they had no other choice, and through somehow, some way, decided to give their relationship another try, not really addressing everything that it really came beforehand. And the fact that he kissed another girl right in front of her, and there was a lot of miscommunication between the both of them. It just really felt like the book just mushed them together towards the ending of the third book, and I personally think that it would have been better if they had gone their separate ways. In fact, I really like the show's approach to this. I like the fact that they separated him after he came back from when she used Murzos to revive him, therefore splitting this whole idea of destiny that's constantly being holding them together. I wanted to see what would happen when Mal finally realized that he doesn't have to be attached to Alina and she doesn't have to be attached to him, and he can go find his own personality and his own thing, and she can do her own thing as well. I thought that would have been great because then it would have forced Alina to open up more to other people who could have been better suited to her. But I don't know. You guys tell me. But let's move on to the second garbage piece of trash that I personally don't like. I didn't even want to put the Darkling in the title because I don't even think he deserves an honorable mention. Now, I know you're going to ask, Deborah, why are you being so harsh on this character? And the thing is, don't get me wrong, I love Ben Barnes, okay? I've loved him since Prince Caspian, and he will always be one of my first TV crushes of all time. Don't forget that. But that's not going to make me stop seeing the horrible character that is the Darkling. And the books made me hate him even more. Don't get me wrong, in the show, the Darkling and Alina do have some sort of chemistry, but you have to remember the only reason why he was even interested in Alina in the first place was because she was powerful, in the sense of she had power that he could harness. And that's the only reason why he deemed her as his equal to even be close to him or for him to be romantically interested in her. But outside of the fact that she was a sun summoner, he would have never given Alina a second glance. Towards the end, even though the show tried to hint at a possible romance, the power dynamics were always going to be off. This man is, I think, 100 plus years old, and Alina, who had no sense of self, who was thrown into the mix, no idea what she wanted, definitely feel that he could sense that, and he took that and took advantage of it. And he practically did try and groom her, especially in the books where at certain points they start telepathically communicating with one another, and he somewhat gets into her room and he pretends to be Mal to try and kiss her and to try and touch her, which is really, really disturbing. But he knows that he can do that because she was feeling lonely, and he would constantly put these ideas in her head that no one else would be good for her but him, because they are both equals in power, was at some point just really sickening. And let me not even get started on the fact that this man practically gave Genya as a gift to the royal family, and most definitely likely knew the fact that she was being assaulted by the king, and he didn't do anything about it. He didn't protect her because that would have gotten in his way for wielding power within the little palace. At the end of the day, the Darkling stopped at nothing and didn't mind hurting innocent people, killing innocent people and children to get his way. So he is not a viable consideration for a potential relationship. I don't care. I don't care how much you're into dark romance. I'm sorry, I cannot support this union. This guy is a creep. Throw him in the trash. At certain points in the books, Alina wonders maybe it would have just been better to have just stayed with him, and maybe they were equal, but at the end of the day, it would have never been an equal relationship because he already showed his true colors when, well, he put Murazov's collar on her and practically tried to use her the whole entire time. For him, it was all about corruption rather than understanding who Alina truly was. He just saw her as an object that he could use, not as a real person. But let's move on. The third love interest, Nikolai. The thing is, I actually really do like Nikolai Lantsov. At first, I was a little bit wary of his character, but honestly, he has grown on me. Nikolai, for me personally, if I had to choose out of this love triangle, would have been my preferred option. But at the same time, he is also quite a mixed bag. He's naturally very funny, charismatic. I'm reading his spin-off right now, and I do enjoy his character. He was very much a breath of fresh air compared to Mal, who was constantly just being Mal and just being super broody. And it was just also great to see somebody else in the Darkling be around Alina. He is smart, intelligent, and an all-around fun guy. But at the same time, the reason that Alina and him even became such good friends in the first place is that, well, he saw her as a good political pawn / match. In the second book, when Alina arrives to the palace after helping them escape from the Darkling, he sort of parades her as, well, like a prized goat. And this is something that Alina herself even notices. Now, naturally, she was not attracted to him in the beginning, and I don't think he was really attracted to her, but I did like their friendship. I did like the fact that they could have a friendship that was mutually beneficial to them. And I did like that they had that sort of foundation. But one thing I really didn't like when he was parading her around different towns for political gains is the fact that he forcibly kissed her in front of everybody without her consent or permission, and it threw her off so much she had to kick him in the carriage. I think it's just personally the way I am, but I would have just liked for somebody who was interested in Alina that wasn't afraid of who she was as the Sun Summoner, but at the same time didn't try to use her as a political pawn. I really would have loved that for her, but you know, you get what you get. But I also think at the same time, he was definitely someone who was needed in this show. He needed to show Alina that she could be more, that she could be quite powerful. And I think as a result, his character definitely pushed her out of her comfort zone, which I really did appreciate. Now, that doesn't excuse any of the things that he's done, because he deserves multiple beatings for that, period. But at the same time, I'm glad that his character was there to show her that she could be more than just an orphan from Karamzin, that she could be a political prowess. One of the parts that really starts to show Nikolai's influence is when in the second book she has to gather an army to face the Darkling out of the remaining Grisha at the little palace, and so she has to sort of display her power. Nikolai taught her how to do that, and without that sort of teaching, she would have never tapped into that other side of herself to be able to display power and also make people fear her to some degree, as they should. He made her that realize that she is bigger and better. And while Mal was constantly discontent with the life of nobility, and he didn't like all the rich pompous people, Nikolai grew up in that world, so he knew how to help her navigate it. Now, of course, the nobility were still quite assholes, and they wouldn't be short of calling her a witch if she wasn't helping them. But the fact that Nikolai was kind enough to show her the ropes and also be super vulnerable with her about his own childhood eventually down the line is what I liked the most about him. Now, I know in the show they probably were going to have a sort of marriage. The show was definitely hinting between a marriage between the both of them. I wasn't really sure about how I felt about that. I mean, in the books, Nikolai, towards the end of the book, actually does ask Alina to still marry him because he eventually does fall in love with her. And in the books, when she loses her power, he still wants to marry her because, well, he likes her for her. I would have loved to see how that would have played out in the seasons, but of course, we won't be getting that anytime soon. But I don't know how I personally would have felt about their marriage. I think it would have been so interesting, but at the same time, where would the spin-off of his personal life have come into play? Would they have mixed the storylines? I'm not really sure. All in all, if that wasn't meant to be an option, I would have also loved the alternative scenario where Alina could have just not been with a romantic partner for a while. I would have loved the opportunity for Alina to be her own person and to build stronger friendships and a bigger community with everybody else around her, rather than constantly being in the throes of romantic relationships all the time. I really felt like Alina definitely needed to build herself more because she never had the opportunity to, and there was a lot of things that we never really get to hear about. Maybe she could have used her ability to go find out about her parents, learn about a lineage, why she is the sun summoner. I know that has to do with Marisova's journals and there's a whole bloodline that's involved, but I would have loved for her to get a little bit deeper on that on an emotional level, rather than just focusing on Marisova's journals and his master plan to create this weird sort of power play between people. But I would have loved to see her explore herself more and also take the time outside of codependency and a relationship and figure out what she's meant to be doing and her own power and be her own powerful person. Not to say that she isn't that with Mal, of course. I mean, it does get better towards the end of the books, but I do feel a little bit unsatisfied, as if we could have done a little bit more rather than her just ending up with Mal and opening an orphanage. But I don't know, that's how I personally feel. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. And do leave your comments down below how you personally feel about Alina's character growth and her love interest. Do you guys feel like we should have had any other alternatives? Or perhaps Alina should have just been alone? Or perhaps you liked Mal and or Nikolai, and that's also okay. I do love the Grisha-verse, and there's definitely more things I want to talk about, especially when it comes to the Order of the Kopralki. Why is it divided like that? Or Jenya's story, and I feel like that doesn't necessarily get enough recognition as it should. Or David, or the crows themselves. If you guys would like to hear more videos about the Grisha-verse, please let me know down in the comments below. I feel like that works better on my channel than me breaking down the books, but I'm not sure. So you guys let me know, and then I'll delve deeper into the topics like I did with my Divergent series and the Hunger Games series. So you guys can let me know about that. But yeah, otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Okay, bye.